Humanity did not live in a market from the very beginning. In the beginning, what mattered to humans was not price, but survival. Is there food to eat today? Can we hold out through tomorrow? Demand and supply were not concepts that sat on a graph from the start, but very old human instincts born out of hunger and scarcity. The story begins in the very distant past. It was a time when there was no money, no markets, and no price tags. People spent all their energy looking for right in front of them, and searching for fire. When they were hungry, they needed food. When they were cold, they needed fire. And when they were in danger, they needed safety. What we call demand today actually started from these basic needs for survival. Then, where did supply begin? It began when someone became capable of making what was needed. In the beginning, there were those who excelled at hunting, those who were good at making stone tools, and those who knew how to keep a fire burning for a long time. Humans began to live together with their different abilities, and from that very moment, exchange became possible. Trading what I have for what you have. That was the very beginning of the economy. Early exchanges were very simple. It was a system of trading a rabbit I caught for berries you picked, or a tool I made for grain you stored. However, barter always came with a great inconvenience. This is because a transaction could only happen if the other person actually wanted what I had. Even if I need something, if the other party does not want what I am offering, the trade is completely blocked. This exact inconvenience eventually forced humans to create a better way of exchange. And so, humans began to leave records. The Sumerians of Mesopotamia recorded grain, livestock, and stored goods on clay tablets. This was not a simple note. It was the historic first step that made the economy visible. The moment they recorded who had what and how much, humanity was already taking a step toward the concept of price. Though money did not exist yet, the calculation of value had already begun. Much later, around the 7th century BC, coinage appeared in the kingdom of Lydia, located in what is now western Turkey, giving precious metals a fixed shape. The reason this was so monumental was that a standard anyone could accept had finally been born. A world opened where people no longer had to compare every single item one by one. Money made exchange incredibly fast, expanded the scope of trade, and, above all, allowed people to compare prices. Once money enters the equation, supply and demand begin to speak the same language. Items that people want more become scarcer and pricier, while items that can be produced in large quantities are released more easily. Price is born right between those two forces. In other words, price is not just a cold number. It is a signal that simultaneously shows how much people want something and how available it is. From this point on, supply and demand began to push and pull each other in the daily lives of human beings. Entering the Middle Ages, the market became the very heart of the city. People no longer traded only with their close neighbors. Merchants from distant lands appeared, goods from other regions flowed in, and markets opened under the official permission of the king. The Champagne fairs in France were a prime example of this. Furs from Northern Europe, spices from Southern Europe, and textiles and metals from various regions all met there. The market was not just a physical place. It was a space where information, logistics, and power converged. During this period, trade continued to expand wider and wider. With the dawn of the Age of Discovery, the center of trade shifted from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic Ocean. As the oceans grew wider, markets expanded as well. And supply and demand were no longer the problem of a single city, but of nations and entire continents. Where a product came from became crucial. And shipping, wars, and government policies began to swing prices. Price was no longer just the simple result of a local trade, but a footprint left behind by the global tide. Next came the era of mercantilism. European nations believed that hoarding gold and silver was the ultimate path to a wealthy and powerful country. Therefore, they tried to maximize exports and minimize imports. During this period, the market did not move completely freely. Royal policies, colonial trade, monopolies, and taxes all shook prices heavily. Supply and demand were still functioning, but they were heavily suppressed under the weight of absolute power. However, with the arrival of the Industrial Revolution, the entire situation changed dramatically. The emergence of steam engines, spinning machines, and factory production completely redefined the very meaning of supply. In the past, the limit of supply was what a human being could craft by hand. But now, machines exploded production quantities exponentially. Goods were made in larger quantities, faster, and much cheaper. The era of mass production had officially begun. As supply expanded vastly, the market transformed into something completely unrecognizable. The Industrial Revolution changed far more than just the products. It fundamentally reshaped human lives. Rural populations flooded into cities, workers entered factories, and wages and living standards emerged as entirely new social issues. Just because supply increased, did not mean that everyone became wealthy overnight. As production grew, competition intensified, and inequality widened alongside it. The economy was becoming a highly complex system that could no longer be explained by simple common sense. The man who attempted to organize this massive tide into the language of economics was Adam Smith. In his 1776, in his book, The Wealth of Nations, he explained how individuals pursuing their own self-interest could ultimately connect to the order of society as a whole. This is the famous concept widely known as the invisible hand. From this historical moment, the economy began to be understood not as mere morality or politics, but as a self-moving, independent order. The perspective gained ground that while the market is not perfect, it can always move toward equilibrium through the mechanism of price. However, the person who translated human demand into the language of mathematics was someone else. It was Antoine-Augustin Cournot. In 1838, this French mathematician and economist analyzed the relationship between demand and price through mathematical formulas. He looked at the mathematical relationship, where an increase in price leads to a decrease in the quantity demanded, and a decrease in price leads to an increase in the quantity demanded. This was remarkably close to the starting point of the demand curve we are so familiar with today. The reason Cournot was so important is simple. He sought to view the market not as a vague human sensation, but as a defined structure. By explaining the relationship between price and quantity, demanded through equations, he transformed the economy into a calculable entity. Later, Alfred Marshall refined this framework even further, firmly establishing the concepts of the demand curve, supply curve, and equilibrium price that we see in textbooks today. The familiar X-shaped graph we see so often was, in fact, a destination arrived at after an incredibly long history. In the modern era, the market changes its form once again. Now, prices are no longer determined only in the middle of a physical marketplace. Apps, algorithms, platforms, and big data swing prices in real time. Flight prices shift instantly based on demand, delivery apps fluctuate according to the hour and location, and online shopping malls read the flow of sales with a single click. Supply and demand are still fully at work, but their appearance has become incomparably faster and more complex. Ultimately, supply and demand are not concepts restricted only to economics textbooks. It is a living history that shows how humanity has resolved scarcity, how we turned surpluses into exchange, how we built markets, and how we began to read prices. Price did not just appear out of nowhere one day. It is the accumulated result built over vast periods of time by human survival, technology, trade, power, and ownership. We are still witnessing the exact same scene every single day. Certain things suddenly become incredibly expensive. Some vanish one day without a trace, and others seem to run away faster the more everyone desires them. This is not a strange anomaly, it is simply a very ancient tide showing itself once again in the shape of today. When you look at a price tag at the grocery store, or when you see values fluctuating on an app, take a natural moment to think one step further. Price keeps moving continuously, and that movement always, inevitably, begins right between people. It starts with someone's choice.